everyone, and welcome to the Sunday service of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Lake Norman. Everyone, members, friends, and especially visitors, is warmly invited to stay after the service to talk with our minister and chat with each other. We are an open and inclusive congregation. Being UUs, our members walk very diverse paths to find meaning and purpose, but we are united by our belief in the inherent worth and dignity of all, and by the responsibility to express our faith through acts of justice and compassion. My name is Sandy McFeely, and I've been an active member of this congregation since 2013, and I am honored, starting this month, to be a member of the Board of Trustees as Vice President. Our minister, Reverend Pat Jobe, is our speaker today. He will tell us how a decades-long relationship between a college freshman and a professor of religion got started with a few magic words. The same magic words that many of us coming to a UU congregation also found reassuring. A quick technical note, because COVID-19 is on the rise, and also I understand there's a bit of weather out there, we are trying a new format today. What you will see and hear is happening live from various places around the state. We are grateful to Autumn Weathers for being firmly at the controls and reminding us to sit or stand up straight, please. She will also make sure a recording of the service itself is posted on the website and on YouTube. During the service, you and the congregation will have your Zoom connection muted. At the end, after the chalice is extinguished, being muted or not is entirely your call. Reverend Pat will now begin our service. Then Mike Alec will take us with his music into a time of worship and contemplation. Reverend Pat.
Our opening words come from Mark Twain, who probably was not a Unitarian, but was one of our founding fathers in terms of spirit. He said once that he had considered becoming a clergyman, but he discovered that there were two problems with that. The first was that it required a religion, and he didn't have one. And the second was he discovered that clergy people experience the ecstasy of presumption.
When we gather as a community, we light a chalice and offer a thought about what it means to do so. Today's chalice lighting words are from Paul Stefan Dodenhoff, who is a part of the UUA central staff. There's a tiny adaptation at the very end. For this 1 hour, Spirit of life, we let go. For this 1 hour, may we let go of our anxieties, our fears, our angers, our self-doubts, our regrets, our petty grievances, and our distractions. If only for this 1 hour, let the flame of this chalice burn them away from our hearts and minds and light our way to peace, serenity, and loving kindness. Ours is a spiritual and caring community where we find our joys amplified and our sorrows lessened. We would ordinarily take this time to share our personal joys and concerns, but many are too personal and private for such a public space. So the chat time after the service will still be available, and Reverend Pat is always ready to provide pastoral care. His telephone number and email address are lavishly spread around on our website and in the newsletter. So we do recognize and embrace all those joys and sorrows that for now remain in our hearts unspoken. Moving on, we'll proceed directly to the story for all ages.
I'm not going to tell a story in violation of convention and protocol, but I'm going to remind you all of a story. And it is the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I love telling that story to my own children when they were of that age. And my favorite phrase in the story was just right. I think sometimes that in the world we're living in today, the porridge is too hot or the porridge is too cold. We feel a lot of conflict back and forth over politics and social issues. But we as a congregation, as a gathering of like-minded and like-hearted people, will do very well if we seek actions, beliefs, thoughts, emotions that are not too hot, not too cold, but just right.
And I think we'll find that Mike Alex music taking us into a time of worship and contemplation will be just right.
All right. Good morning, all. Enjoying the snow here while it lasts. This is a song of mine called The Miracle of Love. I'm just going to play it instrumentally.
Beautiful, Mike. Thank you so much. You add so much to our experience. I have to note the irony. If we were still working to meet live, we would have had to cancel today's service. Earl Crow turns 90 today, and there's a good chance that since we are recording this service, that he will actually participate later on by watching the recording. So let me say from the bottom of my heart, happy birthday, Dr. Crow. 50 years ago, I was a tortured college freshman. There was much about me that was not tortured. I was haughty, arrogant, insufferable, talked incessantly as though every word that dripped from my lips was making the angels sing. But I was tortured by the theology of eternal damnation. I had been steeped in hellfire and damnation, also called the loss of connection to the Holy Spirit, a sort of lifeless life beyond the grave, where I could not even hope for water to quench my thirst or a scrap of bread to quell my hunger. As the old song goes from Hee Haw, all I had to look forward to was gloom, despair, and misery on me. And the fires would burn me hot and never go out. Eternity would loom like a never-ending trip to the dentist. My certainty that I was doomed was based in my attraction to the opposite sex. Almost every girl who walked by looked like she would be so much fun that I was willing to risk eternal punishment just for a long, luscious look. I would pray against my sinful sightlines but none of those prayers were ever answered. One spring afternoon, Dr. Earl Crow, head of the religion department at what was then called High Point College, was lecturing on the unconditional love of God. And there were 23 of us listening to him. One of the 23 interrupted Dr. Crow and said, "What about hell?" And Dr. Crow said, smiling, "There's no hell." He gestured with his right hand as though he could wipe away years of church history and theology. No hell. And he explained to us that there have been Christian Universalists as long as there have been Christians who believed in eternal damnation. In the hills of Appalachia, they are called no-hellers. People who believe the gospel stories are about an undeniable love that will, before they call the roll up yonder, claim the whole of humanity. As I mentioned, there were 23 of us in the classroom that day, and 22 of them went into a kind of growling rabble, as though they were going to grab Dr. Crow's chair and throw him out the second floor window of our classroom. But there was one, me, on the other hand, who wiped my brow and went, "Whew, what a relief. There's no hell. I wasn't going to hell because there isn't one." Even for Unitarian Universalists, this is an extraordinary revelation. It's one thing to reject the crazies among fundamentalists and guffaw at their blood vessels bulging out on their necks as they preach what Mark Twain called an elect so small they were hardly worth saving. It is quite another thing to own our historical connection to a movement of people who really read the gospel stories to be about the salvation of the world, about being accepted and loved, about food for the hungry, clothing for the naked, liberation for the prisoners, and peace. Dr. Crow has spent a lifetime working for peace. I love it when Jim Price connects us to one of our social projects and then sidles up beside me and says, "This is who we are. This is who we are. We are about feeding hungry people." What could be more of an affirmation of this universalism that is our nature? We've all heard the stories of hungry people being handed a plate out the back door by generous mothers and grandmothers. We sometimes sing about there being room at the victory table for all. This is who we are. It is almost as though we believe if anybody is hungry, everybody should be invested in the harvesting, transporting, cooking, and serving of food. There's plenty for all. This is who we are. And this is who Earl Crow is. He has preached basic kindness and human decency throughout United Methodist churches and on both the campuses of High Point University and Wake Forest University. In fact, he is the only adjunct professor in the history of Wake Forest to be named Faculty Member of the Year. His lifelong friendship with Father Daniel Berrigan got him arrested, protesting war with Berrigan. His beloved, brilliant, and superlative wife, Shirley Raleigh, once got a wave from the back of a police van from Berrigan and Crow as they were being hauled away. She said she did not get arrested because her ex-husband, a newspaper owner, had gotten her press credentials. Ms. Raleigh also taught at High Point and inspired me to think I could write, just as Dr. Crow inspired me to think I could serve the church. Crow would also let me come over to his house and watch the Waltons on Thursday nights. We had a wonderful time, and I really don't think that he resented it much, although he may have. We talked about politics, theology, and social action. Dr. Crow invited Berrigan to speak at High Point, and I listened to him talk about the great need in the world for people who work for peace. It was a stunning and inspiring talk. I wanted so badly to believe the future he imagined was possible. After the talk, I went up to him and I asked, Father Berrigan, do you really believe that ordinary people are going to do the things you imagine them doing? He said, I find when I am giving up on ordinary people, I am giving up on myself. Berrigan also told us during his talk that he had recently been released from federal prison. He said, it's quite an education. I don't recommend it. Berrigan's death on April 30th, 2016 has been a great cause of grief for both Dr. Crow and Ms. Raleigh. Among many acts of friendship, he officiated at their wedding. Berrigan and his brother Philip were arrested many times, protesting war and military spending. They were often joined by Martin Sheen and Elizabeth McAllister, a former nun who was married to Philip Berrigan. A spokesman for the Plowshares organization says that Philip Berrigan was arrested over 100 times protesting war and taking actions of disarmament. He spent a total of 6 years in prison or jail, and his brother Daniel was not far behind him. Dr. Crow introduced Berrigan to the Bubba newsletter and Radio Free Bubba. He was kind enough to allow us to use his words as a blurb on the back of our collection of radio pieces. He said, Bubba is a light in a time of darkness. This is who we are. This is what we do. If you are interested in the scholarship behind universalism, I would recommend you read David Lowes Watson's book, God Does Not Foreclose, or Rob Bell's book, Love Wins. Also, there is a fantastic Netflix film called Come Sunday about the journey of Bishop Carlton Pearson from hellfire, damnation to Unitarian Universalist. He is now part of our congregation in Tulsa. And the movie tells the remarkable story of his believing he heard God say what I heard Dr. Crow say in 1973. There's no hell. It is a crazy, bamboozling story of power and control, which is not even supported by the Christian texts. If you read them with universalist eyes, you will see there's no hell. Every reference to what we construed as eternal damnation is simply a metaphor for the deep regret felt by people who refuse to be kind and generous during their earthly lives. There's no hell. We do hear people say all the hell we need is on this side of the grave, that everything from sinus trouble to cancer to bad breath to Barry Manilow music is hell enough. But most people who talk like that understand that hell is just symbolic language, not a literal deep fat fryer for eternity. What a horrible idea. What a sad idea that twists whatever loving kindness we find in life into a very crazy trap of a hateful and vengeful God. There's no hell. Some of my ministerial colleagues, even the liberal and socially conscious ones, will say, oh yes, there is a hell, and I've got a list of who I want to go on it. Makes me wonder if maybe they're on somebody else's list. I know some Protestants believe that all the Catholics are going to hell, and some Muslims believe that everybody who's not one of them is going to hell. The list goes on and on. If there is a hell, it's a mighty crowded place. Twain called them an elect so small as to hardly be worth saving. But there's no hell. Dr. Crow took me with him to meet Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in 1976. She shook the foundations of about 500 or 600 High Point clergy who had gathered to hear her speak. She also rejected the idea of eternal damnation and affirmed that among the 20,000 interviews she had conducted with people having near-death experiences, none had found fire and brimstone on the other side. All had been greeted by loving light. As your minister, I have to affirm that I have no idea what happens when people die. But I do know what does not happen. I am certain from a deep and abiding place about what does not happen. There's no hell. Happy birthday, Dr. Crow.
Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun. I say it's all right. Little darling, the smiles returning to their faces. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun. I say, well, it's all right. Sun, 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 here it comes. Sun, 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 here it comes. Sun, 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 here it comes. Little darling, I feel that ice is slowly melting. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been clear. And here comes the sun, doo-doo-doo. Here comes the sun. I say it's all right. It's all right.
Sorry about the frogs.
Thank you so much, Pat, for those most reassuring and eloquent words. And thank you, Mike. You have captured perfectly the net result of Pat's talk. We are grateful for the contributions so many of you make to this fellowship. They allow us to sustain and grow our congregation and to confirm our commitment to the larger community. We have a new treasurer, Agnes Fiore. She'll be sending messages and budget updates from time to time, so be on the lookout for them. And you will find our mailing address on the website, the Facebook page, and in the newsletter. Now for a few announcements. First, Agnes's husband, Joe, is recovering very well at home from knee replacement surgery. Happily, he didn't have to spend even an overnight in the hospital. Second, Zara and Bruiser are grateful. They send their deep appreciation for the new fenced enclosure that the UU Animal Ministry built for them yesterday, just in time for this weather. No more chains, no more tethers. Third, the UU kitchen team at Feed NC in Mooresville prepared lunch for 50 or so food distressed people on Thursday. They made Southern fried chicken, and there was plenty left over for the many dozens of home delivered meals provided by Feed NC. To volunteer for this elite crew, contact Jim Arnold. All the rest of the announcements are in the newsletter. Please take a look. They are pretty good. And now we'll hear from Reverend Pat to close our service.
Our closing words come from Christopher Moore. He wrote a book called Lamb. It's the gospel according to Biff, Christ's childhood friend. And it is a filthy, filthy book. I don't recommend it for any of you who are soft-hearted at all. But there's a moment in the story where Jesus disappears because he and Biff are in India studying with an Indian guru. And the guru teaches Jesus how to disappear. And Biff begs him to come back, begs him to reappear. He says, "You're not done. You've got more work to do." And Jesus reappears. And when he reappears to Biff, he says, "Love thy neighbor as thou lovest thyself. For he is thee and thou art he, and everything worth loving is everything."
And now to conclude our service, we extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again.